where do Jewish people actually come from? Some say their ancestors lived in the ancient Middle East and stayed genetically unchanged. Others claim Jewish identity was shaped mostly by exile, conversion, and centuries of living across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. For most of history, the only answers came from religious texts and oral tradition. But something has changed. Scientists can now extract DNA from ancient human remains buried thousands of years ago, and they're comparing it directly to modern populations. What they've discovered is shocking. The genetic evidence tells a story that's far more complex than anyone expected. It challenges long-held beliefs about displacement, exile, and survival. And here's what makes it even more intriguing. The DNA doesn't just reveal where Jewish people came from. It reveals how they managed to preserve something ancient through centuries of upheaval. You won't believe what the science actually shows. Before anyone could study genetics, the ground itself was hiding clues. There's a narrow strip of land along the eastern Mediterranean called the Levant, and people have lived there continuously for thousands of years. Cities rose, fell, and were rebuilt on the exact same foundations. Archaeologists have dug up ancient sites like Megiddo, Lachish, and Jericho, and what they found changes everything. There's no evidence of sudden population replacement, no clear moment where one group completely vanished and another took over. Instead, the archaeological record shows something unexpected: continuity. Many ancient texts describe invasions as total extinctions, entire peoples wiped out and replaced. But the physical evidence doesn't support that narrative. What it shows is long-term survival. Before the Israelites existed, before Judaism was even a religion, people were already living in this exact region. They spoke similar languages, worshipped local gods, farmed the same land, and passed their lives down through families. So, the real question isn't whether Jewish history begins here. The question is how deep those roots actually go. And what researchers discovered about the first Israelites is going to surprise you. Ancient texts mention groups called Israelites appearing in the highlands during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. For decades, historians debated where these people came from. Some believed they were invaders who arrived from somewhere else entirely. Others thought they emerged from within the local population. Archaeology strongly supports the second theory. Early Israelite settlements don't look like foreign colonies at all. Their homes, tools, and even their food habits closely resemble those of nearby Canaanite communities. The main differences show up in religion and social organization, not in material culture. There's no solid archaeological proof of a massive invasion that brought an entirely new population into the region. Instead, the evidence points to something more gradual. Groups already living there began organizing themselves differently, forming new identities and traditions over time. This means the early Israelites weren't strangers to the land, they were locals. Their identity developed right there within the region, shaped by shared ancestry, geography, and collective memory. For centuries, this idea was based only on archaeology and historical reasoning. But then scientists gained access to a tool that could finally test it directly, and what they found was extraordinary. For most of human history, DNA could only be studied in living people. That limitation disappeared when scientists learned to extract genetic material from ancient human remains. In burial sites scattered across the Levant, researchers started analyzing skeletons from the Bronze Age, long before Judaism existed as a religion. These remains belong to people archaeologists identify as ancient Canaanites. When scientists compared this ancient DNA to modern populations, the results were absolutely striking. Modern Jewish populations, despite centuries of migration and exile, share a significant amount of genetic ancestry with these ancient Levantine individuals. And here's what makes it even more remarkable. This connection appears across multiple Jewish communities, not just one isolated group. This finding shattered many assumptions. It proved that while religion, language, and political power changed dramatically over time, the underlying population didn't disappear. Empires rose and fell. Egypt ruled the region. Assyria conquered it. Babylon exiled the elites. Yet, the genetic signal remained surprisingly stable. And the exile described in historical texts reshaped culture and belief, but it didn't erase the people themselves. Most families remained genetically rooted in the region, even when political control shifted. This discovery confirmed what archaeology had been suggesting all along. But the deeper scientists looked into specific genetic markers, the more astonishing the evidence became. To understand genetic continuity more clearly, scientists examined Y chromosome DNA, which passes from fathers to sons. This allows researchers to track male lineages across thousands of years. One Y DNA group appears again and again among Jewish men, haplogroup J. This haplogroup is common throughout the Middle East, and especially concentrated in populations with ancient roots in the Levant. It appears at high frequencies among Jewish communities, including those that lived continents apart for centuries. Within this group, two branches are especially important. The first is J1. This lineage is particularly associated with Jewish priestly families known as Kohanim. Genetic studies show that many Kohanim share a closely related Y chromosome pattern, suggesting descent from a small number of male ancestors who lived thousands of years ago in the region. The second major branch is J2. This lineage is linked to early agricultural societies and urban civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean. It appears not only among Jewish populations, but also among other Levantine groups, reflecting shared ancient ancestry rather than recent mixing. Here's the crucial point. These lineages didn't appear suddenly in Europe or anywhere else. They point directly back to the Middle East, and more specifically, to the same region where archaeology shows long-term population continuity. Judaism formed around these people. These people didn't form around Judaism. But as Jewish communities spread across the world, something unexpected happened that genetics can now measure. Over time, Jewish communities spread far beyond their ancestral homeland. The expansion of the Roman Empire played a major role in this process. Wars, revolts, and political pressure pushed Jewish populations into North Africa, Europe, and parts of the Middle East. This long period is often described as complete displacement, but genetics tells a more complex story. When scientists compare Jewish DNA to that of surrounding host populations, they find something unusual. Both Jewish groups from different regions are often genetically closer to each other than to their non-Jewish neighbors. This suggests that despite living among many different societies for centuries, Jewish communities somehow managed to preserve a shared ancestral core. Cultural rules, social boundaries, and community structures helped maintain this continuity. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. When scientists looked at maternal lineages instead of paternal ones, they discovered a pattern that tells a completely different kind of survival story. The DNA passed down through mothers reveals something that male lineages alone could never show, and what it reveals explains how these communities endured some of the darkest periods in human history. So far, we've focused on male ancestry and what it reveals about deep origins in the Middle East. But genetic history isn't complete without examining women. Mitochondrial DNA, often called mtDNA, is passed from mothers to their children. Unlike Y DNA, it doesn't follow family names or priestly lines. Instead, it tells a quieter story about everyday survival, family formation, and long-term continuity. When scientists examined mtDNA among Jewish populations, they noticed something intriguing. The pattern didn't always match the male lineages exactly. Among many Jewish communities, especially Ashkenazi Jews, a small number of maternal lineages appear again and again. These lineages are very old, but they show signs of what geneticists call a bottleneck. This happens when a population passes through a period where only a small number of women contribute to future generations. This doesn't mean Jewish ancestry suddenly changed or disappeared. Instead, it suggests that at certain points in history, Jewish communities became smaller and more isolated. Wars, persecution, migration, and economic pressure all played a role. Some women joined these communities through conversion or marriage. Others came from small founding groups that expanded over time. The result is a maternal genetic pattern shaped by survival rather than conquest. This makes sense when we look at the historical record. Jewish communities often lived as minorities within larger societies. Their survival depended on close family ties and strong internal bonds. Over centuries, this left a clear mark in the maternal DNA. But the most surprising discovery was still ahead. Today, Jewish people are often described using terms like Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Mizrahi. These labels reflect geography, culture, and history, not separate origins. Ashkenazi Jews developed primarily in Europe. Sephardi Jews trace much of their later history to Iberia and North Africa. Mizrahi Jews remained largely within the Middle East. At first glance, these groups seem very different. They speak different languages, follow different traditions, and often look different from one another. For a long time, people assumed this meant they came from completely separate populations. Genetics tells a different story entirely. When scientists compare DNA across these groups, they consistently find a shared Middle Eastern core. On genetic maps, Jewish populations tend to cluster closer to each other than to the non-Jewish populations around them. This doesn't mean they're identical. Each group carries additional influences from the regions where they lived. European Jews show some European genetic input. North African Jews show some North African influence. Middle Eastern Jews show continuity with neighboring populations, but the core remains visible. This shared genetic signal points back to the same ancient Levantine ancestors we discussed earlier. It confirms that Jewish identity spread geographically, not biologically. People moved, communities adapted, but ancestry endured. This is why Jewish populations separated by thousands of miles still share detectable genetic connections today. And here's what that really means. By now, a clearer picture has emerged. Jewish DNA isn't the product of a single moment in history. It's not the result of one exile, one conversion wave, or one migration. Instead, it reflects long-term continuity shaped by movement, adaptation, and survival. Archaeology shows that the people of the Levant didn't vanish. Ancient DNA confirms that modern Jewish populations descend in part from those same Bronze Age communities. Y-DNA reveals deep male lineages rooted in the Middle East. Mitochondrial DNA shows how small communities endured difficult periods and rebuilt themselves again and again. Together, these lines of evidence tell a simple story. Jewish identity formed through culture, belief, and shared memory, but it rested on a real biological foundation that remained surprisingly stable across thousands of years. This doesn't reduce Jewish history to genetics. DNA doesn't define faith, culture, or belonging, but it does challenge the idea that Jewish people are recent outsiders to the regions tied to their earliest history. Science doesn't support the idea of total replacement. It supports continuity. That continuity survived empires, exile, and centuries of dispersion. And what allowed it to survive reveals something profound about human resilience. It survived because communities adapted without losing their core. In the end, the most surprising revelation isn't how much Jewish DNA changed, but how much of it stayed the same. History often tells stories of disappearance and replacement. Genetics tells a quieter story of endurance. From the earliest communities of the ancient Middle East through exile, migration, and life across Europe, North Africa, and Asia, every chapter has left its mark on Jewish DNA. The genetic evidence shows that an ancient people remained connected to their past, even as the world around them transformed completely. Memory, tradition, and biology worked together to carry something forward through thousands of years. What the DNA reveals isn't just ancestry. It's proof that survival sometimes means holding on to who you are while everything around you tries to erase it. And that's a story written in every cell,